Hi, I'm Rocky. In this talk, we'll be covering NetMonster, a game that no longer exists. I'll show you some NetMonster fan sites from the early 2000s internet, and as a heads up, this will be a very visual talk. I've embedded websites directly into these slides, and I won't necessarily read the content out loud, but hopefully you can read all the funny bits yourself, and you can always get the slides later. So let's jump right into it. Hi, I'm Rocky. In this talk, we'll be covering NetMonster, a game that no longer exists. I'll show you some NetMonster fan sites from the early 2000s internet, and this talk is a very visual talk. I've embedded websites directly into these slides, and I won't necessarily read the content out loud. But hopefully this video is very detailed, and you can kind of read all the funny bits on your own, or at least get the slides later. So let's jump right into it. And now, this is classic pre-web 2.0 internet. So for anyone out of the loop, this is a professionally built site for the cult classic film Space Jam. This site is real. It still exists and has valid web code. And again, very classic internet. It has excellent design taste. It has animation. It has blue text on green background, not to mention a table layout. And we have a banner up here. And I want to emphasize this was done by professionals. Now, the sites that were built by novices weren't exactly different. This is also a real website found in the Wayback Machine roughly the year 2000 and still table layouts, some interesting color choices. There's banners and badges, there's a guest book, and there's a web counter which the service is down so I made it green so you can see it. What you don't hear is a 2-minute Chrono Trigger audio MIDI file looping in the background. There's even a under construction text because back then you needed to be on the internet now. There was no staging type sites for us. And this is a fan site dedicated to the game NetMonster. We'll come back to this site, but I just wanted to give you the glimpse of early 2000s internet because this can be a culture shock if you're not familiar with yellow text on noisy backgrounds. And so let's just kind of get that out of our system. And let's talk about NetMonster. This game existed from roughly 1999 to 2001-ish. And the thing I want to point out is this guy here. This is a NetMonster badge because hidden on this web page is a collectible monster. The monsters came in all sorts of weird shapes and sizes. The tagline for the game was Internet Monster Hunting at its finest. Now, NetMonster was a free downloadable game from the late 90s where you collect monsters from URLs. For NetMonster, it was a very Pokemon-esque-ness with the collecting, and how it worked was the player would grab a URL with a NetMonster badge, the player would enter it into the game. Based on the code snippet, the game client would generate a monster. So one URL equals one monster. And you needed strong monsters to defeat the bad guys. The game stopped at version 1.4 because a hard drive crash erased the source code. And there was never a NetMonster version 2. And here's a crazy fact. This game has been abandoned for more than 15 years, and you can still run the NetMonster client today. It was written in .NET and works on Windows 10 machines. It's an absolute tech marvel. So today, we visit the same websites like Facebook and Reddit and Wikipedia, and in the early 2000s, when we called it the information superhighway, there was no Wikipedia. But there was a lot of people who had to share their knowledge, so they built websites, and often for free. So there was an industry of free website builders like Geocities or Tripod or a dozen other free web services. And to find these knowledge sites was still a challenge. Google was still being figured out in 2000. Like searching did exist, but I mean, good luck. And much of the internet was organized in topics in what we called web rings. People made websites based on a specific topic and they joined a web ring. And really, very often we just created shrines for our internet anime waifus. And you'd put your website on the web ring and now people can find it. And going back to NetMonsters, there were NetMonster websites because to catch NetMonsters, you needed to find websites with the NetMonster badge, which means visiting NetMonster web rings, which means being familiar with fan sites about NetMonster. And this is where we hit this sad point because that is a lie. The internet isn't forever. This was an obscure game in 2000. These fan sites are dead. You can't Google NetMonsters and find anything about the game. I went to page 50 in the search results. It's not there. These fan sites are gone from the modern web. Heck, Geocities doesn't even exist anymore. So I dug into the backups of data hoarders through GeoCity torrents and through the Wayback Machine in order to find these fan sites that no longer exist in the modern internet, which brings me back to Kragok's NetMonster Reality fan site. So Kragok, what is your site about? I've included the metadata because I just thought it was hilarious. So on the left side, it's hard to see. There's an FAQ. Kragok provides links to catch monsters. But if we scroll down, I love this fan art, and you can kind of guesstimate Kragok's age. And this text is hilarious. And over here is that NetMonster web ring list. The links to catch NetMonsters, they're not all pages full of content. Many of these fan sites had pages upon pages of empty HTML files with a single button and sometimes a banner. Like this was an actual web page. So let's move on. So this is Comics Castle. His banner alt text is kind of interesting, but if we scroll down, he has a bunch of really sweet material for that NetMonster visitor. There's even comics, which unfortunately leads to broken images. I want to show this random story off, April 1st, 2001, where he says, NetMonster sucks. Why do I even have this page up anymore? I'm erasing this page tomorrow, and I just uploaded a virus to your computer for even daring to play NetMonster. Then you read the next line, April Fool! Ah, you joker. Let's keep trucking along. This is Darcy's NetMonsters. Let's ignore the H1 for a bit and scroll to the goods. And it's really cute. This line, dogs, wolf, take us home. Oh, Darcy. Darcy was a helpful member of the NetMonster community. Darcy even organized the monsters into these categories for us. Thanks, Darcy. But heading back to that H1, NetMonster works on a freemium model. To unlock everything, you had to spend $25 or refer a bunch of people to buy it. So Darcy is saying over here, refer me, get me a premium license, and I will give you secrets. Darcy was an entrepreneur. So we hit some fun sites, but here's some of the sadness. Not every site was intact. Like Powerpuff CA, look at the right side and all those 404 errors pointing to images. What was here? We would never know. Then we have Dux's site. Dux had a NetMonster choose your own adventure. And he had a quiz. And none of the links worked. And I looked. So that was kind of sad. So let's kind of get real depressing and wrap up with Chris's NetMonsters. So around the early 2000s, Chris hosted his NetMonster site on a free hosting platform called VR9. And somewhere between fall and winter of 2000, Chris revamped his site to be more of a table design. You could really start to see his hobby peak on this page, where he has over 2,400 NetMonsters in his collection. And I just love on the side where he shows off his computer specs. But something fascinating happened in the year 2000, which was the dot-com bubble burst, and that free host was affected. And what I know is that by 2005, that URL pointed to this site on the right. Now, this isn't an end to Chris's story because maybe Chris knew about living on free web hosts because Chris migrated as much as he could to a new free hosting server. And a lot of the design is still there. He even calls his account NetMonster, but something is missing, which is a lot of the details. But in 2003, just 1 year after the migration, something else major happened. This time, it wasn't involving any dot-com bursts or bubbles. In 2003, Chris changed. He revamped his website. The URL is still the same. It still has a NetMonster URL, but now it's a blog about Latin. And there's no reference to NetMonster. It's sad, like real Toy Story 3 sad. There's a lot of sites I didn't even cover, but we can start to piece together this universe, and it's kind of pointing at all of these missing pieces. And here's the thing. I don't even like NetMonster. It was an awful game. And that's what makes me sad because I had a random thought about a random web game that I played for like 2 days in 1999. And you can't deny that there's a real history that the modern internet has nothing about. The internet is incredibly fragile, and if it wasn't for the Wayback Machine, it would have been lost forever.